Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. A 4,000-year-old cemetery and rock art reveal forgotten ritual landscape in Morocco's Tangier Peninsula. So we have a very interesting prehistoric story here that dates back to roughly 300 to 500 BCE. So quite a long ass time ago.
Yep. And 2,500 years is pretty good for uh continuous use on a site about that age. That's usually you see a lot of places like they start moving around a bunch and then coming back over time. But no, this seems to have, been, fairly consistent use for 3000 BC.
And this puts it into roughly the early Bronze Age, which is incredible. And this is in an area where people used to cross over from what was the Mediterranean Sea back and forth on numerous times, and they ended up finding a number of burials, including a cyst burial, which is a rock tomb lined with stone slabs that they managed to hard date back to 2000 BCE, so incredibly dated. And when you
Yeah.
look at some of these stones here, they're absolutely massive.
Oh yeah, no, several of them were uh up to and even larger than 8 feet tall. They've been found as both rock art and cemetery settings, and they're some form of territorial marker with spiritual significance. We see this in a lot of societies. You know, 1,000 years and more after this stops happening in Morocco, you see the Norse doing this with their
Mhm.
waypoints. You see this in Ireland with the Celts. This is a common human practice to take as large of an upright stone as you can, jam it into the ground, and carve something on it that holds, some form of meaning. This is signage for the ancient world.
And one of the things that the authors suggest, which I think is a very interesting theory, is that the various different types of burials that they come across, the pit graves, the hypogea, the cysts, the tumuli, and basically the monuments near the crossroads, show long term social change and increasing territoriality among the populations, which is really interesting, especially when you consider that cremation became widespread in the Mediterranean during the first millennium.
Yeah,
BCE, and that they have persisted a lot longer, showing a different cultural trajectory.
yeah,
And it's
yeah. The people in Tangier here, right under the Pillars of Hercules, as they were called back then, aka the Strait of Gibraltar. They didn't really care what was popular in Greece or Tunisia.
it's interesting to me though, because one of the big things and one of my big critiques of the field is there have oftentimes been these long held theories or biases that have been pretty, I don't even want to say ironclad, but they've been grasped onto longer than their original shelf life. And this really kind of contradicts one of those biases, which have oftentimes focused primarily on Roman or Nilotic contexts, and they neglected the larger prehistory. They were so hyper fixated on the Romans that they ignored a lot of prehistoric funerary and ritual landscapes.
Yeah, no, like most ancient North African work focuses on people either from Rome doing their Roman thing, making the Roman Empire out of the Mediterranean Sea, or whatever was happening on the Nile with the Egyptians. And that's kind of most of what there is. Everything seen through that lens of either Rome or Egypt. And here is a place that was very much alive for a very long time, had its own unique identity, and was associated with neither of them.
And then switching over to the academic article, looking at some of the graphs here, you can see where this site is located right on the Tangier Peninsula in the Strait of Gibraltar. And you can see the locations of 3,800 BC settlements and then settlements that have dated to 800 to 500 BC. And there's even a few that persisted even longer, and they're all within the same geographical region. So you see that there's multiple different cultures and contexts intermixing here, and they basically became their own unique thing. And the burials, the dolmens, the tumulus, the hypogea, the cysts are all in pretty concentrated locations, actually,
Yeah,
right
and
along
like you,
the water.
yeah, and like one of the things you can even see too is like you can't claim that this was some unified thing from what is now Spain on the Iberian Peninsula, because on some of the maps and whatnot it shows that even when they're doing the same thing, like was what would be cyst burials, they're doing them in two distinct styles, one on the Spanish side and one on the African side. So they're not, even when they do the same thing, they do it differently.
Yeah, which is interesting to see such a cultural difference at such a geographically close interval.
Yeah.
But it's very interesting, and here's some of the dates with calibrated carbon 14 dates. Um, it poses some interesting questions, and this is one of the things that I really do enjoy about archaeology and studying stuff like this is there is always the potential to have different ideas popping up that maybe contradict the norm. Granted, they're not extremists like aliens built the pyramids, but there's always that room for these fringe theories to gain more traction or to gain more credibility as time goes on. And this is done just by looking at how they buried each other. Burials have to be some of the richest context for archaeologists to come across because you can really get an insight into religion, rituals, beliefs, especially when you look at some of the grave goods that people are buried with. Especially because you don't tend to bury Uncle Joe with the good axe if he's the one that had the good axe.
Yeah. You might bury him with the nice axe, but you're not burying him with the useful one.
And
And
that's pretty
uh,
common.
yeah, and Uncle Joe gets to hold on to that axe for a very long time because it takes a lot more nerve to rob a grave than it does to rob someone else's house.
But seeing all the different burial context in such a close geographic region really does show some overlap in transition times among all the research that had been done. And it leads to a lot of interesting theories, and this is one of the things that I really hope to see is that I hope this is the tip of the iceberg, the beginning of that more intensive research, because I would not be surprised if they were able to eventually suss out 4 or 5 different culturally identifiable and unique early Bronze Age cultures. And I know that might be a little contradictory or a little extremist here, but I think there's good potential for that.
Yeah. At the same time, though, this is a 2,500 year span of history. Um, Pick any country on Earth, like say in Europe or anywhere else, and go back 2,500 years. They do not look the same.
No.
You know, the France, Gallic tribesmen, very much not French, not even ethnically French at that point. The Franks haven't even gotten there.
It's honestly impressive. But I think that's probably a great point for us to wrap up this episode. Thank you guys for watching. Let us know your thoughts down below, and we'll see you in the next one.